Hey guys, welcome to Boxing Squared for boxing news and views from around the internet. The WBO has signalled it could make Oleksandr Usyk wait before he gets his title shot against Anthony Joshua. So he is the current WBO mandatory. There was, prior to the pandemic, a fight lined up for him against Derek Chisora. Things have gone quiet on that front because obviously a lot was cancelled, hasn't been rescheduled. And we'll come to that particular fight a little bit later on because it's curious, it hasn't been rescheduled. Very quiet on that front. But also, Eddie Hearn isn't mentioning Usyk's name. That's got to be concerning for Usyk in terms of, what's happening next with him. But we'll get to these comments from the WBO, specifically its president, Paco Valcarcel. So he had tweeted, and bear in mind before I get into this tweet, I think it's slightly ambiguous because I read it a certain way and then I saw an ESPN article suggesting the complete opposite, but there has been some clarification. So this tweet here, see here on screen, love to see WBO unified champion Anthony Joshua fighting WBO former and current WBC champion Tyson Fury for the undisputed heavyweight champion of the world, but WBO mandatory should be next. So I read that to be, okay, he's saying that before Undisputed, he would like the mandatory to happen before that. But ESPN, they did an article, and that's not how they read it. They read it as Usyk would be after the Undisputed fight. So clearly the wording there, you can read, different things from it. So I looked to have followed up. I sent a Paco Valcarcel, I added him and said, hey, can you clarify, what are you actually saying here? But you can see here, under this as well, Rob Weatherall from Mixed Combat Radio, and follow that channel if you already don't. They do great live streams. So he was in a bit of a dialogue with Paco Valcarcel. So he said the winner of Joshua Fury undisputed fight, so Usyk must face the winner of Joshua Fury if all goes to plan. And he said, yep. So that means Usyk would be after Joshua Fury. And if you do a bit of a timeline, say that Joshua has his fight against IBF mandatory Kubrat Pulev at some time in 2020, then if he manages to get through that, an undisputed fight with Tyson Fury, a fight, all of us would like to see an undisputed fight. And bear in mind, this video isn't about advocating for Usyk. It's about highlighting some of the issues and some of the players involved and potentially some unfairness, because obviously, if you hark back to December 2019, the WBO called the Usyk mandatory. Usyk is the current WBO mandatory. He had that status by way of a super champion status from cruiserweight, so he could go up a division and take the mandatory. He did that. They called it in December. Ultimately, they worked out a deal where Josh would face Kubrat Pulev first. So the idea was that Usyk would be after that. But seemingly, the WBO, seeing the dollar signs, no doubt, with an undisputed fight, if it comes to fruition, is saying, actually, you're probably going to have to wait, and we'll do that one after that, because obviously Rob Weatherall, seeking clarification like others, including myself, got an answer that Usyk must face the winner of Joshua Fury, and Paco Valcarcel said yes. And if that is the case, and they end up having two fights, this is Joshua and Fury, if it was to come to pass, that would probably mean 2022 at the earliest for Usyk and his title shot. And that must be extremely concerning, because he can't sit on his laurels in the meantime. He's got to fight someone, do something. But currently with the pandemic, the fight that he was meant to have, obviously got postponed, and there has been no rescheduling of it. And it's been very, very quiet on that front. And just in recent weeks, Eddie Hearn really hasn't been talking about Usyk too much. There were some comments in regards to an undisputed fight when that should happen, that Eddie Hearn has said to Sky Sports just in recent days that they would want to see Dillian Whyte getting his shot against Tyson Fury in the WBC before the Joshua and Fury fight, if that was to happen. So I was sort of thinking at the time, well, he's representing both Whyte and Usyk. Yet Usyk is the sort of odd man out here, hasn't been mentioned. There's no talk about rescheduling that fight with Derek Chisora, and I know that there is a school of thought that they just won't do it without a crowd, that they need to sort of have a crowd to make the money, that makes that fight more viable than, say, someone else like a Dillian Whyte, who could have a pay-per-view behind closed doors, and that probably does better than Usyk Chisora. And I can see the logic there. But that kind of leaves Oleksandr Usyk in a weird place, in a weird limbo, because he's on a contract. He's only had one fight on that contract, and he can't really sort of do much or go anywhere. And I'll just bring in here, so he's co-promoted by Matchroom, but he is also, he's co-promoted by K2. So there's been some comments by his management, Alexander Krasjuk, to Boxing Scene, where he stated Usyk, his highest achievement at cruiserweight in order to obtain the mandatory position at heavyweight, and as his promoter, the fairest thing I can do for him is ensure that his sacrifice has not been made in vain. We must deliver the heavyweight championship fight for Usyk as fast as possible, and we will stand our ground. So it sounds like a real messy situation is in the offing, because the different sort of goals and objectives for Eddie Hearn and the broader Matchroom may not necessarily line up with Oleksandr Usyk and K2, even though they're working with Matchroom, they're with them on a co-promotional deal. They obviously want Usyk to have his shot sooner rather than later. But now the WBO, with their sort of statements, Paco Valcarcel saying that actually he could end up facing the winner of an undisputed fight. But that could push a title shot out for at least 18 months from now, minimum. I don't think they're going to be very happy at all. And it has made me wonder in recent weeks, because of the quietness from Hearn, he hasn't been talking about Usyk. What sort of rift is there? Is there some sort of rift between K2, Usyk and Hearn about the way things are going? Because there's no talk about that Chisora and Usyk fight being rescheduled. And that's something that, if it had have been, it would give me more confidence in their current working relationship. But I'm wondering, is Usyk sort of tangled up now where he can't really do too much, and that with a plan that may be in place to try force an undisputed fight next, and I'll come to the WBC in a moment, he may just be like a bit of a spare wheel at the moment and held to the mercy of his current deal with Matchroom. And I think we need to consider that. And it sort of reminded me a little bit of back about 4 years ago, Luis Ortiz, he signed with Matchroom. The ultimate goal for him was to eventually face Anthony Joshua. That never panned out like that. He had a couple of fights. He was tossed in there with Malik Scott, Dave Allen. And then he ended up leaving frustrated because he felt he was being stymied. And I'm getting a little bit of that same sort of feeling here with Oleksandr Usyk. Hearn has just gone so quiet on Usyk and sort of what's happening with him in his career. It's a little bit concerning. If I was Oleksandr Usyk, I would certainly be, very, very worried about what's actually happening. Because if he's made to wait the best part of 18 months to 2 years to get his title shot, obviously he's going to be pretty bitter about that. And with a guy like Usyk, who relies on athleticism and movement, and maybe we are coming to, because his style is heavily dependent on those, and he's starting to age a bit, he's starting to break down a bit, he's getting more injury prone. Maybe the best years of Oleksandr Usyk in terms of him being a force in boxing, maybe we're coming to the tail end of that. And I would want to be, if I was him, maximizing my prime while I can, giving myself the best opportunity. And if he has to wait a couple of years, maybe that's not going to be good for him. So the WBO clearly looking at their 3% or whatever it is, they would be wanting to get a big chunk of change, part of an undisputed fight, if it could come off. But if they're getting behind the undisputed fight and sort of casting Usyk off to the side, makes you wonder, will the WBC do the same? And clearly all these sanctioning bodies, move the way that they want to move, and they will contradict themselves. They will do all manner of things that are consistently inconsistent. So I could totally see the WBC, and I've spoken about this before, using the pandemic and this delay against Dillian Whyte and basically saying, look, we said that you were going to be for February 2021, but actually, we're going to push this out. I could see them doing something to ensure if one side of the equation in the WBO, their mandatory is taken out of the way and taken care for the time being, and if the thirst for an undisputed fight is there and they're willing to try to make that and everyone gets rich off it, I think the WBC would jump at it. So we could potentially see a very sticky situation. And while Eddie Hearn is publicly, he's not talking about Usyk, he has mentioned Dillian Whyte, but he sort of said, that's important to us that he gets his title shot against Fury. But when push comes to shove, Dillian Whyte is still the number 2 heavyweight at Matchroom. He's not the number 1. And the number 1 makes money, and that's going to make a lot of money with Tyson Fury, an undisputed fight. At the end of the day, Hearn's loyalties will lie with who the cash cow is and where the money's coming from. Dillian Whyte generates only so much when compared to Anthony Joshua. So he may end up, like Usyk, being collateral damage. So it's a very concerning situation, I'm sure, for both guys, especially if Usyk does get shoved aside. And it could get messy. Maybe legal action, litigation could ensue at some point, because Dillian Whyte will say, look, you already pushed me out of the way, made Tyson Fury the mandatory. You used the UCAD situation to install him as the mandatory for 2020. You said 2021 February for me, and now you're trying to move the goalposts again. I could see that getting very messy, and Usyk, maybe his team, maybe there is some sort of rift here at the moment, because it doesn't seem like there's any direction right now for what next for Oleksandr Usyk. Is this fight with Derek Chisora going to be rescheduled? Remembering, Chisora right now is talking about MMA, he's training, says he's going to be having a fight in Bellator. He doesn't really seem to be looking at this Usyk fight and really talking about, well, is this thing going to happen? Maybe he's already resigned to the fact that it's not happening, and if it does, it's not happening for some time. But in the meantime, if Usyk is all tied up early in his contract, this co-promotional deal with Matchroom, he's got little room to move in terms of he can't just leave. But maybe after whatever his deal is up in terms of the number of fights, maybe he could end up bolting, especially if he's going to be pushed to the background. And some people will say that it's another Luis Ortiz situation. But what do you make of this? Do you think Oleksandr Usyk is being treated badly here? Do you think this is just, this is boxing? It's boxing all over. People get shat on all the time. Undisputed is undisputed. And if the sanctioning bodies are going to get everyone out of the way to make sure it happens next, if they keep winning, then actually that's just boxing, and we want to see that fight more than an Oleksandr Usyk fight or a Dillian Whyte fight. Drop a comment, loud and often, hit like, hit subscribe, follow me on Twitter, boxing_squared. I'm out.